Hi, I'm Ravi, and I am a product and business growth enthusiast. And this is episode number 2, and I'm going to talk about business model innovation for exponential growth companies. And the lessons that I have drawn from is Reid Hoffman's book, Bliss Scaling, which became one of the most influential books that laid out strategies of what it takes to get exponential growth, one of the finest books, and I will be focusing on the business model innovation for such growth companies. All right, this is the book Bliss Scaling by Reid Hoffman and Chris Ye. So both of them came up with this book in 2017, I suppose, 3 years ago. But it's still relevant and a very practical guide to understand the intricacies of what it takes to grow for massive exponential growth companies. So let's begin. And they called the phenomenon as bliss scaling. So let's talk about the business model innovation of such companies. So I'll be covering 5 topics here. We'll introduce what does exponential growth companies business model innovation means, and then we'll talk about the 4 growth factors for best business models. We'll talk about what are the business model patterns that have proven to be working for such massively exponential growth companies, and what are the growth limiters. Okay, what are the speed bumps that can actually impact your growth. And we'll also take one case study. So the book has close to 5 case studies, but for this presentation, I'm going to talk about, I'll pick one case study here. All right, so what do we have in the introduction? All right, if you have followed the evolution of how the rise of internet startups to the dot-com bust, and then the rise of some of the most popular internet startups, you would find a pattern. And the fact pattern is most successful startups post dot-com crash, they survived because of new business models. Let's see what we mean by them. So if you have followed, I mean, the most common sense would have suggested that Walmart would have won in online retail business, but it did not. It failed. Instead, Amazon, a new player in online retail, went on to become a winner. Similarly, the traditional news and phone companies, they would have digitized themselves and would have won, but not exactly. So new players like eBay and Google, they became the new winners on the internet. The other example was eToys, which actually wanted to replicate the story of Amazon but could not. And so what were the primary reasons, and why did some companies, the new entrants, succeeded but others did not? And the reason is those who failed were failing because they only invested in technological innovation, but they did not have a sound or solid business models backing them up. And that was some of the reasons why few players succeeded, and the other traditional players who digitized themselves and thought they would rule internet as well, they could not. So let's try to understand what the definition is behind when we talk about business model. What does business model mean? Reid Hoffman gave us the definition of what business model is, and its power lies in its simplicity. It says business model describes how it generates financial returns by producing and selling its product. As simple as that. Next, so what are the 4 growth factors for best business models? So when we are talking about exponential business models, so what are the 4 growth factors? So there are 4 growth factors. 1, market size. 2, distribution. Number 3 is high growth margin. Number 4 is network effects. These are the 4 most important factors that are common for all exponential growth companies. Let's go after them one by one. Building massive company, you need to eliminate ideas that serve too small of a market. If your business model is serving a small market, then there is no point in going ahead with that because you would not grow beyond a point. Number 2 is big markets offer large potential customers and multiple channels to reach your customers. And this can only happen when you have a big market. Number 3, VCs need above market returns, at least triple their investors' money. So For all the growth stories that you have seen, from the Airbnbs to the Amazons to eBays, whenever investors have tried to fund, they have always looked at least three times the returns. And this is a rule of thumb mostly in VC world. And let me share some examples and some stories on how it has happened in the past. So here's the template. A 100 million fund needs 300 million return over a 7 to 10 years. This is a rule of thumb. This is how most big VCs operate. They need at least three times the return money over 7 to 10 years. VCs need small amount of incredibly successful companies. So usually they have a portfolio of companies and they're always looking at those two or three companies that will give them the bang for their buck. And as I said, it's mostly three times of what they have invested. Hence, when they invest, they usually filter out companies that do not have a big market size. So only if they have a big market size can they expect to have returns that are three times what they have invested. So there is an interesting story of Brian Chesky, who's the CEO of Airbnb, that when he had his pitch deck, his market size was only 30 million, but he was given sagely advice just before he pitched that to change the numbers from 30 million to 30 billion. And that is when he could gain attention from investors. So while sizing markets, it's important to account for new markets as well than the incumbent market. And this is very important, right? So for example, and I will give you this example, especially from Uber, because what Uber was trying to capitalize was an existing incumbent taxi market. But what it discounted is the taxi market was beyond what was incumbent, because after Uber came with great product, with great service, and removed all frictions, the taxi market actually grew. And this is a big fallacy that most startups have. They usually constrain their limits to existing incumbent market size. And let me give you an example here. So Uber, they said that, okay, out of 100 billion taxi market, they would, if even if it is 10% of the market, their market share would be 10 billion. However, much later, they received 26 billion payments. That means they had completely under evaluated their potential, and they actually increased the incumbent market size, because a lot of people who were not taking taxis before, they started to take Uber because of the convenience that Uber provided, because of the great product that Uber provided, that because of the frictionless experience that Uber provided. And this is something that most startups often fail to imagine. And there is a very popular tweet by Aaron Levy, who is the CEO of Box.com, and he says sizing the market for a disruptor based on an incumbent's market is like sizing the car industry of how many horses there were in 1910. This became hugely viral, this quote, and this exactly encapsulates the point that I'm trying to make here, which is while sizing market, it's important to account for new markets than only incumbent markets. This was one of the most insightful lesson that I drew from this book. And I think this is, one needs to also remember this forever whenever you are trying to size your market. All right, the next important one is distribution. All right, so the next topic is distribution, and this is one of my favorite areas, favorite topics, and I will let you know why it is and why it is so vital for many young entrepreneurs. Number one, a good product with great distribution will always beat a great product with poor distribution. And there is a bias for most entrepreneurs because they spend a lot of time building a great product, they spend a lot of time optimizing the product, but they pay very little attention at the distribution side of things. Let me show you with an example here. So Dropbox reason to succeed was a good product with great distribution. And too many startups ignore distribution and focus on products, as I said. For a high growth startup, you need to be good at three things: good product, good business model, and good at distribution. If you're weak at any one of them, then you are set to lose. It's going to be a loser's battle. Let's talk about the two types of distribution techniques. Number one is leveraging existing networks. Number two is virality. New companies, especially startups, often do not have the resources or money for ad campaigns and marketing. And therefore, they need creative ways to leverage their existing networks. And let me give you some examples on how some of the incumbents, some of the success stories, they leverage these creative ways. PayPal, eBay. This is a very interesting story. So when PayPal got introduced, they had to find, they did not want to invest a lot of money on ad campaigns. So they tried to come up with creative ways for distribution in leveraging their existing networks. So what they did was they went to eBay, and eBay had, they introduced for all the eBay listings, they introduced a pay with PayPal button. And they made it so seamless and effortless and simple that even though eBay had its own payment service called BillPoint, people stopped using BillPoint and started using PayPal. So this was a very creative way that PayPal won, and they could actually leverage eBay's strength and a massive reach to its users, massive listings, and then they succeeded. Here's what Airbnb did. Airbnb also leveraged an existing network, which was Craigslist. Craigslist was hugely popular as a listing service, and then they used the power of Craigslist network to spread Airbnb. So here's what they did. So for every new customer, they said, they actually messaged them saying that, you know what, reposting your listings from Airbnb to Craigslist will increase your earning by $500 a month on average. And when the customers saw this, they immediately responded to this message, because who does not want to increase their earnings by $500? And this actually clicked, and Airbnb became viral. So these were some of the creative ways on how the successful startups like PayPal and Airbnb succeeded. Let me talk about the negatives of existing network as well. So the negatives is Zynga tried to do the same by leveraging an existing network of Facebook. But what happened was Zynga had a not so successful story with Facebook, because Facebook, after a point of time, stopped all gaming services like Zynga and from appearing on Facebook. So as a result, Zynga lost that advantage, and it had to devise other ways to reach to its customers. Zynga survived, but it survived because they had good backup plans. But this is just a flip side to the story on how you over depending upon an existing network can also be sometimes detrimental to your success and growth. Great. Let's talk about virality. Virality as a distribution technique. So what does virality mean? So virality comes from virus, right? How does virus spread? Virus spreads to a person, and then that person spreads to other persons, and those other individuals, they spread. So it's like multiplies exponentially. And this is how it happens with virality. A user of a product brings more users, and then they in turn bring more users, and then they bring more users. That's how it becomes viral. So there are two types of virality: organic and through incentives. Let's talk about, let's try to understand what organic means. Or organic could be, okay, you sign up for this, and then you automatically add your address book, and it gets imported. So this is organic. Okay, you're not, nobody has incentivized you, but you have through integrations, you could actually import all your phone contacts, all your email contacts, and they get added to a product. Second is, if you have received money, you had to open an account in PayPal. So usually what happens was, when PayPal got introduced, when the sender sent to the receiver for receiver to get that money, he had to open an account. So that was also an organic way for getting more and more users to sign up for PayPal. So these are two tactics for organic. Let's understand how incentivized virality works. So what PayPal did was it actually paid $10 for referrals. So if I referred a friend, I would receive $10 and the friend also received $10. So this is how they started, and they had huge success with that. Of course, all that money was being spent by the VCs, but as they started growing their customer base, user base, they gradually reduced that referral. So they gradually reduced it to $5 for referral, and as the network grew, they completely stopped that referral. So that was an interesting story. Sometimes the incentive need not be paid money. The incentives could also be your product offerings. For example, Dropbox started giving extra 500 MB for each referrals, and that became a huge success story for growth for Dropbox. And within 7 months, Dropbox had 1 million users, and they could achieve that with these referrals. The next point is virality. And what it says is virality doesn't help without retention. That means there's no point going viral and adding users, but those users are not sticking long. Okay, then the entire effort of going viral is lost. So Dropbox, because of its viral strategy, started gaining a lot of users, but eventually only 40% of the users were adding files. 60% were not doing anything. They were just sitting there. And this was a point of concern for Dropbox, because the growth metric was actually a vanity metric, and it wasn't actually resulting in people doing something. So what they did was they conducted usability tests. They went ahead and posted on Craigslist saying, hey, could you come in and participate in a usability test? We'll give you $40 for your participation. And when they started doing the usability test, they realized the friction points and why the users were not adding files. And then they could actually pinpoint those friction points and resolve it. And then the percentage of users adding files went up. So this was a great story on how virality always doesn't help with retention, and this is something that you need to take care of. Excellent. The next point would be, this is also important. Virality requires a product that is free or freemium. Virality never works when it's a paid product. The next one is important. Again, this was an aha moment for me, which says that virality requires a product that is free or freemium. Paid product rarely becomes viral. So this is also an interesting thing that one should keep in consideration when planning for distribution techniques through virality. All right, great. So this is all about distribution. The third topic is high gross margin. This is the third trait of exponential growth companies. All exponential growth companies always have high growth margin. What is high growth? What is a growth margin? Growth margin is sales minus cost of goods sold. So this is the best measure of long-term unit economics. The higher the gross margin, more valuable each dollar of sales to the company. I mean, this is common sense, right? If your gross margin is high, that means your cost of goods sold is less. As a result, each dollar of sales that company makes, it has more cash to again invest back and fund its own growth. So most valuable companies have a gross margin of over 60 to 70 to 80%. So that means if you have to catch attention of your VCs, you have to show such gross margin for your business. Otherwise, you will not gain their attention. So high gross margin companies are attractive to investors. All right, the next one is network effects. This is also a characteristic of an exponential growth company. So let's try to understand what is a network effect. A product or a service is subject to positive network effects when increased usage by any user increases the value of the product or service or other users. So this is the fundamental of any network effect. The more users join the network's value grows. That's the crux of what a network effect is. So Facebook is a network. More people join in, Facebook becomes more valuable because it becomes more attractive to people selling their ads. LinkedIn, also a product of network effect. The more people open profiles in LinkedIn, the more attractive it becomes for employers. So this is the trait of what a network effect is. A product or a service is subject to positive network effects when increased usage increases the value of the product or service. And there's a feedback loop of value creation. As I said, the more you participate, the more engaged you are, the more valuable the network. So there's a feedback loop of value creation. And then again, if there are more buyers and sellers, and the number of buyers and sellers in a platform, for example, grows, then the lock-in also, there is more stickiness to the product and it becomes all the more difficult for existing players to leave. And also what this does is a good network effect. What it does is it makes you a market dominating player. Okay, you become a market dominator. And we have heard so many market dominators: eBay, Facebook, and Airbnb. Now what happens is when there is a market domination, it becomes really difficult for any new player to actually capture that space. So it creates a competitive moat around you, and that's why it's a great competitive advantage to have a network effect. There are three categories of network effect. Let's try to understand what are those three categories. So there's direct network effects, there's indirect network effects, and then there is two-sided network effects. Direct network effects has increase in usage leads to increase in value. And I think I just gave you some examples: Facebook, WeChat, WhatsApp. The more people use, the more valuable it becomes. Indirect network effects: increase in usage leads to increase in consumption of complementary goods, which increases value of original products. For example, adoption of Windows, iOS, these platforms, what did they do? They increased adoption of third-party software, right? So when iOS grew, the popularity iOS grew, the entire ecosystem of the developers and their apps grew. So this is what indirect network effects mean. Increase in usage leads to increase of complementary goods. The same happened with adoption of Windows, because a lot of third-party tools around Windows, a lot of third-party tools around Android, they became hugely successful. So this is a benefit of indirect network effects. And the last one is two-sided networks. Let's understand what it is. The two-sided network is, as I said, a marketplace, right? Like buyers and sellers. Uber is taxi drivers and people who hire taxis. And then Airbnb, which is people who want to rent out their apartment and people who want to live there on short term. So this is increase in usage for one set of users, increases value for another set of users. So this is like a classic case of marketplace between buyers and sellers. All right. So this was all about the fourth growth factor. So just to summarize, what are the four growth factors? Market size, distribution, high growth, high gross margin, and network effects. Let's move to the proven business model patterns for exponential growth companies. Again, very exciting topic. Let's see what have we got. So there are 7 proven business model patterns that you will see with exponential growth companies. Number 1, bits rather than atoms. Again, very interesting. So if you are in a physical retail business, okay, your gross margin is going to be really small. And that's why there's a difference between bits and atoms. Atoms is about digital products, bits is about physical products, and digital products will always beat physical products any given day. And that's why they have a massive competitive advantage. That's why bits have a massive competitive advantage over atoms. Bits have higher gross margin, fewer variable costs, because the cost of building a software and then replicating is much easier than building a physical product. You can iterate faster on software products than physical products. You can achieve faster product market fit. And then to build a massively successful, exponentially successful software product, you don't need a lot of people. So fewer employees. WhatsApp is a classic case. Less than 54 employees, but a billion users. So this is number one business model proven pattern: bits rather than atoms. Number two is platforms. Exponential businesses are platforms. So we all know about incredible success of iOS. In fact, as I'm talking now, there is Apple's WWDC conference, the Web Developer Conference, and they have some amazing announcements to make on their new iOS and OS X release. Incredibly popular and famous and influential, right? The next is Amazon's merchant platform. This is also a platform which incredible influence, and nobody can beat it because they are benefiting and reaping the benefits of network effects, and very less likely that anybody could replace them because they have market domination. Same is the case with Facebook social graph, more than a billion users in Facebook, and that again makes it gives them complete market domination. Great. Next is number three is free or freemium. So most of these products are free, and that has contributed to its massive distribution and virality. And Facebook taught the world that free can be profitable because free gets you all the users, and then you can monetize these users with their usage, with their needs, and sell ads on top of that. Dropbox was successful in a freemium model. They gave 2 GB free, and the additional was paid, and it resulted in massive success for Dropbox. Sorry about that. Number four is marketplace. So what have we got there? Marketplace, as we just mentioned, it's a two-sided network effect. And as I think I already shared this, as more buyers and sellers join, the marketplace becomes more attractive with a positive feedback loop. And good marketplaces allow smooth transactions to flourish between buyers and sellers. So this is also the key of marketplace. So it's not just sufficient to have the buyers and sellers in the platform. They should be able to transact seamlessly. They should be able to exchange, barter seamlessly. If there is friction between the buyer and seller in a marketplace, then your marketplace would fail. So the entire effort, the entire focus should be to make sure that the transactions are happening smooth and seamless. Number five is subscriptions. Again, a very disruptive strategy in the last 6-7 years. SaaS, the entire business model of SaaS is based on subscription, and not just for consumer products, but enterprise products as well. The sales and delivery model provides larger market size and better distribution than traditionally packaged software. And the thing was, earlier, traditionally packaged software was only meant for large customers, but because of subscription model, because of the need to get rid of expensive deployment and field sales, and since everything is distributed through online and you do not need local deployments, what happened was the SaaS companies, the subscription companies, could actually also open markets for small and medium businesses. Otherwise, traditionally, enterprise software were only meant for large customers, and this broke the barrier. As a result, they could enlarge or expand their potential market, because now not just enterprise companies, but they could also target small and medium businesses. So this is what subscription achieved. The next one is digital goods. And what digital goods accomplished: intangible products like stickers from a company called Line, which stickers has no intrinsic value, but it still generated more than $300 million. It was mind-boggling success. And the same you can see in in-game purchases in video games. And why these digital products are so attractive is because they have almost 100% gross margin. There is absolutely no COGS. There's no cost of goods sold. There's no expenses there. Just imagine stickers. What could be an expense there? Stickers, you could use a graphic software, create stickers, and add as much as possible into your inventory, and people just buy, and you get 100% gross margin. All right, moving on to the seventh item, which is feeds. Now, feeds, I think it was introduced by Facebook. Facebook came with feeds, and it was then replicated by many social media platforms from Twitter, from LinkedIn, Instagram. Everybody followed feeds. Now, the interesting thing about feeds, it's a great way to drive user engagement because it drives ads revenue and it also drives long term retention. Because so what feeds offer is an endless stream of information that scrolls down endlessly, and this helps people retain because they could just endlessly scroll and still see new and unexpected content, and it actually engages your senses, and therefore it has a lot of stickiness and habit forming tendencies for its users. Number two, why Facebook feed succeeded, right? I mean, let's try to understand why Facebook feed succeeded. It succeeded because it monetized bored people to catch up with what's going on with their friends' lives, and the ads were carefully targeted based on the user's habits and context, and that's why it was a massive success. The Facebook feed was a classic example, and that's why it was again replicated and copied by all the other social media platforms. So these were the 7 proven business models, patterns for exponential growth companies. All right, let's come to the growth limiters. All right, so we talked about all the good things about exponential growth companies, but what could be the speed bumps and what could still limit growth companies? And we have to be careful of that. So let's try to understand what are the growth limiters. The growth limiters is there are 2 growth limiters. So number one is lack of product market fit, and this is crucial, right? So product market fit is the stage, is the sweet spot where your success of your product is actually validated by a smaller market, and the people are excited about your product, and they would feel sorry if your product vanishes or you have to shut down shop. So this is a sweet spot that you need to validate before you can actually go and scale. And that's the reason this is the growth limiter. If you have not found product market fit, it's a great validation for you that no, you are serving a wrong product, or maybe you're serving a wrong customer segment. So let's delve deeper. The key product market fit question you need to answer is whether you have discovered a non-obvious market opportunity where you have a unique advantage or approach, and one that competing players won't see until you have had a chance to build a healthy lead. This is very, very important. Why it's important? There are certain keywords here that needs to be highlighted. Number one, you have discovered a non-obvious market opportunity. Why non-obvious? Because if it is an obvious market opportunity, you will have a lot of competition. Most successful high growth startups have been the ones who, when they chased that opportunity, it looked non-obvious and people actually wrote them off. Classic example is Airbnb. When Airbnb tried pitching to investors that, you know what, there are people who would actually open the doors of their homes to let strangers live there, was completely taken as absurd idea. And that's why that was a classic non-obvious market opportunity. So nobody actually competed with him, and they were the loners, and that gave an advantage because when they succeeded, they already had built a healthy lead. So these are some of the key important points: non-obvious market opportunity, and one that competing players won't see. So these are the 2 traits that you should be mindful of. So as I said, if an opportunity is obvious to everybody, the chance that you will be the one who succeeds is exceedingly low. The only way to truly prove product market fit is to get the products into the hands of real users, and you have to get to product market fit as early as possible. Okay, it's like to climb Mount Everest, you have to be at Everest Base Camp as early as possible. Similarly, if you want to achieve massive growth, you have to first have plans on how fast you can achieve product market fit. So the first one is lack of product market fit. The second one is operational scalability. And a lot of companies, even though they have a great product and which looks likely to go viral, they suffer from operational scalability. It could be human potential. That means they are not able to hire a lot of people, they are not able to scale with the scaling demands of the customers. And the second is infrastructure limitations. Let's try to understand what have we got with human limitations. So it tells you that design a business model that requires as few people as possible. And I think I already shared, WhatsApp had only 43 employees when they had 500 million monthly active users. So that's tremendous. That's such a rare case, and that's why Facebook grabbed it the moment they found it valuable. The next is, you do not have to just massively hire employees. You can actually outsource a lot of work to contractors and suppliers. And the classic example was Airbnb, the case of Airbnb with its photographers. So Brian Chesky has this interesting comment where he says, do everything by hand until it's too painful and then automate it. Yeah, and next is infrastructure limitations. I think this is a classic case for most growth companies. And if you have known Friendsters, which was a social media platform before Facebook, it was a classic example of how they could not scale because they did not their servers could not handle the growth that their customers demanded. And the same is the case with Twitter. If you remember, I remember this clearly, the Twitter's fail whale image would always pop up when their servers could not manage the load. So this became a classic symbol. Eventually, Twitter survived. Eventually, they actually were able to solve their backend and infrastructural demands of growth. And Twitter is a success today. Now, some of the later players did not have to suffer such architectural or infrastructural needs because Amazon Web Services provided such services online on an incremental basis so that they could actually take care of their infrastructural needs incrementally. And that actually saved a lot of startups from their infrastructural limitations. Excellent. So we are done with most of the topics. Let's end this with a case study of $1 billion business model. And who do you think I have got? I have got LinkedIn with me. So let's discuss about how LinkedIn applied some of the principles that I just shared into their business model. So market size. So what LinkedIn realized that, the entire market for white collar professionals was a huge opportunity. And because it's a professional market and it's not just about any individual, they thought that this was a huge opportunity, and that's why there was a tick mark on the market size. Because as we learned here in my presentation, market size has to be huge, and LinkedIn had a green tick mark for that. Next is distribution. So distribution has to have some organic virality, and yes, what LinkedIn succeeded was in organic virality, because what happened was the users were encouraged to invite through contacts, and they also were very keen to see, okay, who the users were invited through contacts, through emails, so that they could keep track of their key connections. And there was also the feature for email address book importer, and also the users were informed when their contacts joined the service. So it actually raised their engagement because they wanted to see who from their network have joined. So there was this component of organic virality which actually worked in their favor for distribution. And let's go and understand how they did with gross margins. Now, what happened was, because LinkedIn was a freemium subscription service, they did really well with packaging their product in a freemium model, wherein for everybody it was free, but if you had to connect to your friends, there was an artificial barrier. Beyond a certain limit, you could not connect. As a result, they made a lot of money through that, because if suppose you are a potential recruiter and you want to connect to a lot of people, you would have to actually buy a premium service, and that was called InMail. So what it did was, they actually were able to monetize their growth, and as a result, their gross margins became high. So companies also, the second point was, companies paid to find candidates in enterprise subscription. So what happened was, the business model started to grow. So they were getting money from regular employees, because these employees wanted to connect with others, and on the other side they also started getting money from enterprises who wanted to pay to find candidates in the platform. So that's where they were able to keep their cogs less and the income high. Network effects, as I said, great platform. There were buyers and sellers, there were hiring parties, and then there were employees. It's a great network effect. So each new user made the network more valuable for others. More users attracted more companies, and it became a standard that replaced traditional resume. Next is product market fit. So what they did was, when they focused on LinkedIn focused on getting their product market fit as early as possible. And what they did was, in their early days, they hired salesperson, they gave them mock-ups, and they asked them to go to the companies. And lo and behold, when they went and proposed the idea to corporates and to recruiters, they were sold. And that gave them the idea that, you know what, this works, customers are happy and they are willing to pay for this. So they actually validated it and they got their product market effect as very fast. Operational scalability, as I said, LinkedIn was able to scale their sales force while they were also building their product. So both were going parallelly. So that actually helped them overcome their operational limitations. So LinkedIn had a Merlin sales tool which actually could help them from all their customers. They could actually prioritize the hot prospects, drawing from their usage patterns. And also, what this helped was to create personalized sales deck for each of their premium customers. So as you can see, these were what LinkedIn did was it actually applied all the principles that we just shared for what it takes to run massively successful exponential growth companies. So as you can see, LinkedIn could apply all the principles of an exponential growth company, and we all know the success story of LinkedIn. Similarly, there are other success stories. There is Amazon, there's Google, there's Airbnb, which followed the same principles, and it's a great lesson for all of us to apply. If you are ever imagining to create the next exponential growth company, these are great lessons to implement and not to forget about them when you are drawing your business model innovation for your company. So with that, I end this episode, and I would appreciate if you could give me feedback on areas that you see I could improve, and also let me know what topics would you want me to cover in the future episodes. Thank you, and bye-bye.